Welcome everybody. As we continue our class on the disciples of the Maggid of Mezeritch and the early Hassidic masters, and we've gone through some of the great students of the Maggid, Elimelech of Lozinsk, and there's Reb Zusi of Anipol, and we did Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev last week. And today we're going to be looking at the story of Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, who is kind of unique because he took his whole community with him to Israel. And it's really one of the first, this is not something that happened very often back then, that people would move from around the Jewish world to Israel. I mean, you had a community of some Sephardic Jews who lived there, and I guess in the Sephardic world there was this custom of traveling there and going there, but rarely you had a whole community who would go there, but he just picked up his whole community and moved them there, which is pretty remarkable, because it was not a bustling place, and this is before you even had these waves of the Aliyot coming in to bring life, and it was a pretty dusty corner of the Ottoman Empire at that time, and there's a quote not by him, this is even by his disciples, a year after him, the Bat Ayin, who said that he also was a Hassid who ended up in the land of Israel, but he said, when I arrive in the land of Israel, I expected to find streets of gold and hills of gold and cities paved with jewels. When I arrived, I found a dusty city, and as it was until not so long ago. But then he said that 20 years after he arrived in the land of Israel, he had a big feast and he invited all his friends, and he said, this is what happened when I first arrived, but this morning I looked out the window and I realized the hills really are of gold, if you have but the eyes to see them. And so Menachem Mendel he also had this experience, and we'll get to it afterwards from the stories, but he has this story that says that when Menachem Mendel, after he'd been in Israel for 20 years also, or 15 years, he said, I know that the air of the land of Israel does make a person wise, because before I arrived here, all I wanted to say is one bracha with the proper intention. And now that I'm here, all I really want to say is the word amen with the right intention. But Menachem Mendel grew up literally in the house of the Maggid of Mezeritch, even as an 11-year-old boy. And there's a story that once he was walking through the Maggid's house. It must have been a pretty unusual place because he was such a charismatic, big spiritual figure, even though he had physical ailments, so he stayed at his home. And he saw the boy had this mischievous grin on his face, and he said, what's this mischievous grin on your face? And he said, I don't know. And he said, well, how many pages of Talmud did you learn today? And he said, 6 pages. He said, you read 6 pages of Talmud and you still have this mischievous grin on your face. I need to take you to the Baal Shem Tov. So he took him all the way to Mezeritch, and then in Mezeritch he saw the Baal Shem Tov, and there was also Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonia, who was one of the greatest students of Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov looked at Menachem Mendel and told him a story about a plowman and an ox. The story isn't recorded anywhere. They say that the Maggid, he was 11 years old, he didn't understand anything what the story was about. The Maggid understood the full story, and Yaakov Yosef understood half of it. But he said to him, this story is going to be the story of your life. And even though you've got this underneath your mischievous grin, you have a great soul. So they say Menachem Mendel for the rest of his life was trying to figure out the story. And then one day, when Yaakov Yosef of Polonia was dying, and he was a Rebbe just before he left to Israel. He went to visit him just as he was dying, and he arrived in his group. And he arrived in a big kind of fancy carriage, and the students of Yaakov Yosef Polonia said, who is this guy coming to see a rabbi in a fancy carriage? Don't you know our rabbi likes humble people, not someone who arrives in a fancy carriage? And he came out, and because this is the way of the day, but he wasn't even wearing a hat, which was a sign of respect, didn't have a belt on, and had a big long pipe. And they said, our rabbi is going to throw this guy out because of his lack of respect and humility. When he came in, he was greeted like an old friend. And the first thing that Yaakov Yosef asked him was, what about the story of the plowman and the cow? And he said, sadly, because he knew he was going to Israel, he said, I realized I'm far more than halfway into this story. He didn't have that much time left. And then when he left, the student said, how could you receive this guy? He's so impetuous, And he said, you know what? A great king is going to hide his most beautiful jewels inside a cinder of ashes. And he said, so this is the same with humility. He hides his great humility inside a cinder of vanity. So saying he was actually a very humble person, but he didn't wear it on his sleeve. But those who knew that he was really really a humble guy. Since we're talking about obviously more great stories about him, but there's a story that his job was to blow the shofar in the court of the Maggid of Mezeritch every Rosh Hashanah, and so the Maggid of Mezeritch, he would come out and he would call out, right? We do here, Tekiah, Tua, and he would call out the sounds, and he would blow the shofar. Later in life, the Maggid himself was getting very old. He couldn't even come out of his room, so he would just cough the other side of the door, and then he would blow the shofar. But the one year, Menachem Mendel couldn't be there. He was probably preparing to go to Israel. And so instead, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev he was this great, right, a great chassid, was asked to blow the shofar. So he stood on the other side of the door, and when he heard the first call out, he saw a great light and he fainted. And so afterwards, the Maggid of Mezeritch said to him, he said, what happened? He said, well, I saw this great light, it was too much, and I fainted. And he said, you know what? Menachem Mendel used to see an even greater light, and he was not afraid. And so, so we'll see as we study his texts, how profound his Torah was. Really beautiful Torah he had, Menachem Mendel, and really deep spiritual and mystical ideas. But anyway, he had these ideas, right, of going to Israel and getting all of his followers ready, and most of his followers didn't want to. Not everybody wanted to go with him because it was a big trek and it was completely unknown, and obviously it was, a dangerous trip. And how would they make ends meet to go there? And surely enough, when they arrived, within a few years, just like the Aliyot, he went there in 1777, right after the Maggid died. So this is a good amount of time before the first Aliyot. As you can imagine how hard life was over there, and they didn't have money, so of course had to send people back to the old country to raise money, which is what continued to happen for years after that. They once sent a very rich, somebody who used to be a rich merchant who went with him and gave up his business to go because he was such a follower of the Menachem Mendel. But when he went back, he wasn't able to raise much money, and he died on the journey back. And they say that his ghost went back and talked to Menachem Mendel and told him the story, because the money was still on the boat, and that story was somehow passed down. So this is really interesting, and I know, Arya, you have a connection obviously to the history of Israel, but there's Israel of Rodzin, who was the Rodziner Rebbe. He used to say that people asked him, why didn't you follow Menachem Mendel to Israel? Because he was a student of Menachem Mendel, and he said, you know what? Menachem Mendel's journey to the Holy Land paved the way for God and Israel to go back to the land of Israel. This is before the first Aliyot even began. So the Hasidim kind of believed that he kind of brought some of the power of the Hasidic, and he kind of spiritually paved the way for the later people to come into the land of Israel. Maybe a final story of the land of Israel, and then we'll do a little bit of study, because it really wasn't easy at first, and it was not an obvious choice to be there. But they say one year a fool this guy went into the cemetery of the Mount of Olives and blew the shofar, which according to the prophecies, right, is a sign of the Mashiach coming. So he blew the shofar, and people started saying, Mashiach is coming, Mashiach is coming. Menachem Mendel looked out the window, he said, no, this land is not in the time of renewal. This is not the Mashiach. Because he saw how much was left to be done. But then, as we said later, eventually after being there a long time, God even made him very humble, but also then his disciple Barai and saying the hills really are of gold if you have the eyes to see them, and that's so I led a trip to Israel maybe 5-6 years ago for the congregation. And they told that story of this. You can't always tell that the hills are made of gold, even though now Israel is obviously vibrant. And even when I was a kid in Jerusalem was a lot more dusty and less beautiful than it is now. And Tel Aviv didn't have half its buildings, and so there's something powerful about that comment that's still true today. So let's do some study. Anybody have any thoughts or comments before we do a little bit of studying of Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk? There were within the first Aliyot, there were Hassidic communities that moved right to the land of Israel. Not many, but there were some that moved there, and they often suffered more than the other ones. I don't know if they had as much many skills. A few years ago, I shared the story about a later Rebbe who moved with his whole community and all the troubles they went through, and half the community dying of disease and running out of money, and the Arabs attacking them, and so imagine from Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. And there's all these stories. At first, they tried to move to Hebron, but they were thrown out of Hebron. They had to move to Tiberia, and it was all a lot of very difficult life.
I just want to mention, because of the politics involved in everything, that they said that Israel is South Africa.
Yeah.
And basically, this is a land that belongs to Arabs, and we are invaders like the Dutch were to South Africa. This is very important, and because we were always connected to the land.
Yeah.
And in the census of the Ottoman Empire from 1800 to 1914, Muslims were always minority. Jerusalem was largely inhabited.
In Jerusalem, not in the whole land.
No, in Jerusalem. Yeah. We have census in Jerusalem. Jews and Christians constitute about 70% of
Jerusalem
inhabitants.
From 1800. Yeah.
That's important. From 1800 on, that they consensus. Something else about the fact that the land is basically empty. The Ottomans basically blocked the entire seashore and made it a land of swamp, because they were thinking about the Crusader imminent invasion. And therefore, in early 1900, the Zionists bought this very fertile land. They were able to do it because it was really empty. There were no Arabs in settlements in that area of what is known as the coastline.
Why? Sorry, say again. Why did they keep it empty?
Because they were afraid the Crusaders
would come,
reinvade the Holy Land.
Interesting.
So it's very interesting.
They purposely kept it as
about the fact that now the commentary where the Jews are coming and they basically took over land that belonged to Palestinian and Arab, and that they were inhabitants of this land for millennia. It's not true.
Yeah.
In fact, in all the land, aside from what is now the West Bank, which was inhabited for many, many centuries by Arab, the other area all of a sudden become repopulated by Arab because of the development started by the Jews and the British.
Yeah.
So we have in Haifa, my hometown, you have people coming from the Golan Heights, from the Choran, to work in the refineries. So everything that you hear about the so-called native population is much more complex.
It was more,
There is much more gray area than the current attempt to portray these Jews as the invaders and coming from nowhere, and Arabs populated the land for millennia since biblical time.
well, up until the Muslim conquest, obviously Jews were the majority until before the conquest, and I mean, throughout the Middle Ages, Jews, maybe not in big communities, but Jews were always walking.
The term Palestine, since I don't teach this class, Palestine was coined by the Romans.
By the Romans to punish the Jews.
To humiliate and demonize and basically say to the world, the Philistines, who are
the great enemies of the Jews.
Enemy of the Jews, we are going to rename the place in order to humiliate the Jews forever. Those who rebel against the Roman Empire are punished. That's how they are punished. I just came from Italy. If you go to Piazza Venezia, the Roman Forum, you have a map, a Roman map from the 1st century AD, with all the conquests of the Roman Empire. Where is the land of Israel? It doesn't say Palestine, it says province of Judea. So,
well, it was Judea. There's something so ironic, and in the end, this became the identity of the Palestinians, is this name Palestinian, which was
throughout the Ottoman Empire and throughout Arab country, it was never called Palestinian. It was district of Aleppo, district of Constantinople. The revival of the term Palestine came with the British in the 18th, 19th century. The Romanticism of let's go to origins. For them, origin was going the Roman naming of the area of Palestina. So we had archaeologists, and they started this new glamorous vision of Palestina.
Well, it's true. The creation of identities in the 20th century was all, and 19th century was done in many ways piecemeal, taking stuff from the past. Even remember reading an article about how the kilt of the Scottish wasn't even a majority concern to Scottish people until it was brought and made their central symbol, or one of the central symbols in the 20th century or late 19th century. But obviously we have communities who were giving there, and Jews were pining for the Holy Land through poetry and through prayer for thousands of years. In 1777, quite early for this community to be there. I wonder how many Ashkenazi Jews there were in 1777 in the land of Israel. Probably not too many.
No, about demography. Jews constitute up to the final defeat by the Bar Kokhba forces. We were 10 million people. Roman Empire had 50 million. Can you imagine? We were huge in numbers. And after the 2nd century AD, we were decimated, and we dropped to 1.7 million.
Well, it's true, and this is why we now say that as Jews we don't proselytize. Now that's really an effect of exile, but before Jews did proselytize, and we were such a huge proportion of the Mediterranean area and of the Roman Empire. But thank you for bringing up. I think it's important for the context and what we're talking about. Let's go to Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk and his text. Alan, do you mind getting us started?
Sure.
So just again, this Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk wrote this book, which in the Hebrew, the translation of the name of his book is the fruits of the land. So really, these were teachings that he developed his whole life, but then he wrote them down when he was in Israel. There's a whole, by the way, there's a whole segment of Israeli religious people who really like his work and the work of his. I mean, many of them are settlers, but not all. But the Bat Ayin, his great disciple story, who study his work, because this is Chassidut, right? But it was developed in the land of Israel, so they believe it has some of the spiritual quality of the land of Israel. And in the teaching, that also has that old tradition of Hasidism. All right, go ahead, Al.
Hey, regarding the matter of the power to grow that is in the earth, and the fact that despite this power, the earth will only grow something if there is a planting. The explanation of the matter is that the earth and the power to grow that is rooted in it are truly infinite, so much so that it is impossible to increase or expand anything unless one plants a seed in the earth and it returns to dust. Then that seed will awaken and sprout forth, and because it disintegrated in the dust into its source, the earth, the power to grow now has the energy to add more life force to the plant. And the source, the earth, is the middle point between the branches, the plant that is growing, and the supernal forces that give to the earth the power to grow. Therefore, it is obligatory to follow our words that one can only pass into the place of the divine through the Shekhinah by experiencing the taste of a real death and by truly being annihilated within her. And afterwards, he or she will return and awaken through binding to God.
Okay. So without reading the last bit, the beginning is a little confusing, right?
Yeah.
Actually, this is a text one has to read twice. Once you get to the end, it makes more sense. So what he's saying, right, is that that a seed in the earth has to dissolve to then give birth to something new. And that the earth has all this power, right? All the nutrients, everything, and that's what allows a seed to turn into a tree. And so he's saying that this is what we have to do. So Alan, do you mind reading it one more time? Just I think the beginning
Okay.
makes a lot more sense once you read. If you don't want it, we can pass it.
No,
Try, I think-
I'll be happy to read.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just see if it's any less confusing.
Yeah.
Reading it now.
Yeah,
Regarding the matter of the power to grow that is in the earth,
right. All the nutrients, everything is in the earth has the power to grow.
and the fact that despite this power, the earth will only grow something if there is a plant.
So right, the nutrients don't do anything unless there's an actual seed in the grow. They can't grow anything. Go ahead.
The explanation of the matter is that the earth and the power to grow that is rooted in it are truly infinite.
Right, so the amount of nutrients in the earth itself, I mean, it's, I don't know about infinite, but we're close to infinite. Go ahead.
So much so that it is impossible to increase or expand anything unless one plants a seed in the earth and it returns to dust. Then,
So you need the seed has to return to dust for it to then grow. Go ahead.
then that seed will awaken and sprout forth. And because it disintegrated in the dust into its source, the earth, the power to grow now has the energy to add more life force to the plant.
So not only is it making it grow, but it's also adding more again to the
The seed
life
is
force.
broken up.
The seed is broken up. The
up,
seed is
so
broken.
that it
It's
spreads and it mixes with the.
to make new life, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
And the source, the earth, is the middle point between the branches, the plant that is growing, and the supernal forces that give to the earth the power to grow.
So it's saying that the earth, right, and in his mind, right, the power comes from the higher worlds and then goes into the earth and then the seed. So the earth is the middle point between the life that comes on top of the ground and in his mind, the heavens, to give the power, give that power to the earth.
Therefore, it is obligatory to follow our words that one can only pass into the place of the divine through the Shekhinah by experiencing the taste of a real death and by truly being annihilated within her.
So there's a Kabbalistic tradition that the Shekhinah is the earth, the Shekhinah is Mother Earth. So we become planted in that force of the Shekhinah, the motherly energy, so to speak. And when you plant yourself in it, but there's an annihilation of self. You have to strip yourself, you have to strip it away. You have to dissolve into it for the new life to actually, what's fascinating here is saying that what the part of you that dissolve actually feeds that actual energy as well. And within it, and right in the Shekhinah is also considered to be like the middle point between the higher heavens and this earth. And so it's saying that that kind of feeds up then into the heavens, and then you're reborn and you become a plant.
So how do you get to dissolve? What does it feel like when you dissolve?
So he's actually.
Anybody had that experience?
Yeah, this thing, yeah, no, it's kind of like repentance. I mean, the whole thing is Teshuvah.
It's like what, sorry?
It's the whole, it describes repentance to me. Like,
Repentance.
yeah, I wrote like the seed is a transgression, it has to dissolve within you and you grow from that.
So because repentance, right, tshuva, especially when the word to return, return to self. But the word annihilate is maybe even stronger than that. What does the word annihilate bring up for you?
That's
a little
that's
different.
total destruction.
Yeah.
It's a total destruction.
Yeah, you really have to let go to annihilate yourself.
You
Whereas
do,
dissolving
yeah.
is sort of a slower process.
Dissolve sounds a little kinder, right? A little gentler.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, there's, especially in Kabbalistic stuff, and all of this talk about growing, there's no mention of water. Which I find is very odd for something in Judaism to not mention water when they're talking about something.
Water, we haven't gone to any, I don't know why, but water is symbolic of love and of chesed and in the tree of life. So they definitely you need the love, you need the water to feed it. And that was kind of what the Chassidim brought into it. I mean, if you're so the word for annihilation among the Chassidim was bitul, which really does mean annihilation or kind of, what does that bring up for you? Annihilation of self. Well, this is a Hasidic idea that didn't exist in the Kabbalah before, and I remember once bringing it up in the rabbinical school class. I was teaching my classmates. My classmates did not like this idea of annihilation. They said,
Well, it depends what's getting annihilated. For
Mhm.
example, if it's just your surface structure,
yes.
if it's just your personality, if it's just your past, then there's something left. And in fact, that's what people want, is they
Mhm.
want to be able, the Chassidim would like to be able to dissolve what they call the ego. So to
Yes.
speak. So they want to annihilate the ego, which is the social,
Mhm.
social conventional part of ourselves that we
Yeah.
learn as children to be. So if that goes, then you're left with something that's more interesting.
But I think they would say, because the Hasidim believed in reincarnation, right, in Gilgul, in Kabbalistic Gilgul, that they would say even more than the social construct that you're born with, they would say also some of the construct of the way the Easterns say, right, the constructs of habits that are built over lifetimes. So it's really going deeper. So right, what's the Hasidic interpretation of God's command to Abraham? Right, Lech Lecha, go forth from your land, from the land of your birth, Moldatecha, and from the house of your father. It's like go away from all the things that you've learned, right? You have to go away from. I mean, this is even not the Chassidim. This is the basic commentaries, but go away from the habits that you learned in your land, right? What you're talking about. Go away from the ways of thinking and the ideologies that you grew up with. And this says even go away from your father's house. So even go away from what the ideas that your parents taught you to really latch on to who you are, to what's deepened. So they say that's what Abraham and lech lecha, right? Go to yourself, right? So he had to go to himself, which was beyond all those things. And there's actually for Pesach coming up, there's this beautiful teaching that the four cups of wine at the Pesach Seder are about increasing levels of freedom, and the greatest freedom is about even being free of all. Intellectual freedom is being free of the ideas that were planted in you by other people when you didn't have the capacity to make a difference between them. I mean, some of those ideas you might want to bring back or keep, but to take a look, and to be more and more free until the final cup is spiritual freedom too, which
There
is
used to be a bookseller
Yeah.
on Dearborn Street. I
Yeah.
used to go in there. His name was Ben Fine. It was about
Uh-huh.
40 years ago. And so he had all of these strange books that I seem to have been interested in. But anyway, he told me something that was very interesting. He said, in order to start this process, you have to destroy the tables and chairs that you sat at with hater.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, that's the same sort of notion as you have to deconstruct all of your teaching. So anyway, so I took this very seriously at first, and I went home. I didn't destroy the tables and chairs, but I assumed the tables and chairs were the multiplication tables. So what I did was I reconstructed the multiplication tables. So 3 times 4 is 11. I would go through all of this stuff. And I mean, I didn't lose my ability to add, subtract, multiply. And
You didn't lose it.
No, I didn't lose it.
You just
But
lost your mind.
I didn't lose my mind in the process, but it was interesting because it seemed to be freeing at the time.
Interesting.
And Bonnie, you're still married to him all these years
60
later?
Years in June, 60
Just,
years.
Wow.
We'll go to the supermarket. It's
Yeah, so I can still make
say,
change.
still make change. Good.
Are we,
Go ahead.
are we supposed, I mean, just my
Go for it.
concreteness that
Yes.
is getting in the way, I think. But when we talk about planting the seed and it returns to dust,
Yes.
I think I heard David say that it meant that the seed disintegrated,
No, I said that,
or
yeah.
Bonnie
yeah.
said it.
Well, but it does. As
But-
soon as you add water to it, it does.
But does it, if it disintegrates,
It breaks up so that it can sprout from within.
Dissolves into the earth and something new life comes from it.
okay, I guess I was turning it around thinking, yeah, the seed like opens up and then the new life and eventually it disintegrates, not it disintegrates and then new life comes from it, but
It begins
that's
to
okay,
open up.
it's just,
Maybe,
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting analogy
Yeah, it's a
because
good analogy.
it actually opens up first, right? And then there's still a little bit of it. I mean, my limited experience as a farmer, but then it shoots up and eventually that part at the bottom kind of, I don't know
But
what
the
happens,
husk
disintegrates.
the husk of the seed dissolves.
The husk,
actually.
the husk
Right,
dissolves,
right.
yeah.
And so that
Right.
becomes that.
Right,
But there's energy stored within the seed that with the nutrients and the water and the sun then has a
okay,
reaction.
I was just interpreting it as the
Mhm.
seed disintegrates and then how does it?
See, well, it transforms. It forms part of the plant.
Yeah,
As I said, it's
Yeah, it changes form because it's growing and that's a source and
the essence of it changes, right? And it gives birth. And so I think it's a beautiful analogy actually, because it's saying that it's the same thing with, when we put ourselves into this mystery, there's the Shekhinah and trying to dissolve ourselves into it, and there's something new that's born within that reaction, a new self that's revealed. I mean, you could say it's new, or you could say it was always there the whole time, but it was just covered up. And then the other part, because you see, he does say, and afterwards he or she will return and awaken. So there is return and awaken. It's more of an awakening through binding to God. But so this is what we've been talking about all these weeks. This idea of binding to God, and the commandment in the book of Deuteronomy that it's all about, that the purpose of all the commandments are the davek bo, right? To attach yourself to God or to glue yourself to God, to bind yourself. So let's go to the next comment and we'll see how I think we can see through the development how the Baal Shem Tov had these big ideas, but the further you go down the generations, you see how they all developed them into much more particular ideologies and practices. Go ahead. David, you want? Yeah.
Okay, the central worship of God is to bind oneself to God in each and every attribute. Each individual in the people of Israel is really a part of God on high, and he or she can unite himself in total oneness with God without any barrier or separation. And for the first human being formed by the hands of God, one mitzvah was enough for him, and you will bind yourself to him.
Okay. Again, it's a little bit dense, but the central worship of God is to bind yourself in each and every attribute. What does that mean in each and every attribute?
Well, God was supposedly has an infinite number of attributes, according to Spinoza anyway. So somehow, what would that feel like to bind oneself to a thing that had an infinite number of attributes? It's also a sense of dissolval in some way.
So it's also, I mean, if you think about it, if we, in our love should be bound to the divine love, right? And our sense of peace should be bound to the divine peace, and our compassion.
Yeah.
And that's that way you're linking yourself to a much greater source. Yeah, exactly. You become one with those attributes, and you become a vessel for those attributes. Right, he or she can unite himself in total oneness with God without. So by doing that, you remove the barriers because you're focusing in yourself, and those qualities are infinite.
Yeah, and you become as if God himself.
Yeah.
Okay, so the experience you should have when you're doing this, when you're studying this, when you're meditating about this, is you should feel yourself to be the divine.
Should feel that you're one without any barrier or separation, which is again that sense of dissolution or get that because you're removing any barrier.
Have you felt that? Yeah. And your past is a Christian past.
No, I was a staunch atheist and didn't believe in a soul until 2018.
Until 2018.
Yeah.
And something sort of magical happened.
My second wife was a Buddhist, like her mom grew up in a Buddhist monastery. We meditated a lot and had an experience that was actually described in his dad's book to a T, where I was in the Sapphire Kingdom. I didn't know what it meant.
A sapphire.
Sapphire, like I would call it the atrium to the palace of God now, but then I didn't know. That the feeling about presence and everything being okay has never left me once.
Oh, that's wonderful. You know, the sapphire is also mentioned in the Torah a lot. The sapphire.
He read that part of my father's book, which is all about
Your father's into the sapphire too?
Sure, yeah. The tzitzit, right? The tzitzit is there's a thread which is the color of sapphire, and the throne of glory is sapphire, and the sky and the sea and Ezekiel. Obviously, the guy talked a lot about the
I had read his father's book a year before I came here. Didn't know that was his dad's book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So came.
Yeah, randomly found him and happened to figure out who that was through one of these classes. Yeah.
It's quite amazing. Not that many people read his book, especially that first one.
And you had this experience and you haven't lost your mind?
Oh, I did. Oh, my mind was already gone. I found it a little bit more, but yeah, no, my mind's gone.
Your mind doesn't seem to be.
I lived in the middle of the mountains in Idaho for 2 years and basically did nothing but like meditate for about 2 years.
What?
Oh, that was sort of interesting.
I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, that's right before I came back in October to Chicago. That's all I did.
Oh, cool.
So, Idaho took 2 years and just did nothing but think. 2 years.
Great.
Legit.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Until this day, you do a lot of reading and
In
studying.
the process, you decide to become a Jew?
Your
Yeah.
father-in-law.
My
right?
stepdad,
Your
yeah, my
stepfather,
stepdad
I mean,
was 9
stepfather,
Jewish.
yeah.
So it
stepfather.
was just kind of, I looked at people who were good and was like, yeah, he's the best guy I know, I'll follow what he did.
Oh, okay.
We're,
Very interesting.
love having you in this class and, community. But, well, I mean, I think that that once you have that experience, you know, and there's, I mean, I think often these experiences, when they come to people, they come in really difficult times in their lives. You have some kind of experience and it gives you something, and then you spend years trying to build back to it. But I remember once I was in my mid-20s, and I was working as a journalist. I mean, I've spoken about this from the Bima a few times. My whole life was in turmoil and so many different parts of it, and I didn't want to continue the work I was doing, and everything was bad. And I remember being in the metro, and suddenly in the subway, suddenly I had this experience that this metro is not real, and this is not real, and this is not real. And suddenly I got to a sense of what is real, and I remember it completely completely changed my life. From that moment, I had the feeling of, well, what is actually real, and what should be pursued, and what is it all about? And it was an experience. It wasn't this. I said, well, this person here, and this, and then speaking of my father, that's when I started to. I was like, oh well, I grew up with all this stuff. You know, I should go and I have a little wealth of knowledge here, and so then started a deep partnership with my father of studying and kind of looking through all of this. And that's when, you know, I didn't grow up studying texts like this, but all these ideas were all in the background of everything. And so I didn't have a text, but I had the example of it. And then I started to read, and it's like, oh, now I know why I was hearing about these different things. And my mom, who in her own way is into it too, and she's an artist, and she would create board games. Jewish board games are amazing, like the story of Moses for Passover, with the journey through the desert and snakes and ladders. She was an artist, and she made it beautiful. It was just this incredible game, and she snuck in a few of these ideas into it also. Where she once created a cobra out of cork, and it was like going up the cobra was the path of the Passover Seder, and that could go from stage to stage and all these different things. Anyway, but we only have a few minutes left, so let's get to the other side. Yeah, what's that?
I'm not so much into.
Okay, no worries, Jake. Number 3.
Ah, you leave me with the longest one. That's
No, it's not the longest, it's the most,
Impact, yeah.
in fact.
For the true joining of his or her soul with the lower, I'm not even attempt the word.
Shekinah.
Shekinah, and their union with her to take place, so that they are encompassed within her. Their only intention must be to make their personality, individual soul, and greater soul, Nefesh, Branch, and
Ruach and Shema, yeah.
Neshama, into a vessel for her. They will continue to have the sun for a light by day and be bound by God, which are the divine attributes. Nonetheless, it is impossible to arrive at this state except by passing through a real death of the personality. And they shall be grasped by the real terror and suffering of the death throes without any alteration or modification, because it is known that the Zohar calls her the tree of death. And after they have gone through this process and have given their soul over to this dying and suffered the pangs of death, then if God shines the light of divine mercy and revives them from on high, then the light shall illuminate their darkness and bind them to the eternal one and the divine attributes.
Thank you. It's also a very intense text, right? These are very, very a little heavy, but it's why, you know, it's why I shared stories about him before, to get a sense of he was in some ways the most intense of all the disciples, right? The others had, you know, Levi Yitzchak was a joyous, full of life one, and this and that, but he was very intense, and his teaching is very intense, but very powerful, right? So let's go through the text, right? So for the true joining, so this is really, okay, we all try and join our souls, you know, you musical Shabbat, you come, you sing, you do, that's also right? That's joining your soul to all of this, I think part of it. But this is really for the true joining, if you really want to seek this out, true joining of his or her soul with the lower Shekhinah, right? This is a lower part of that, and their union with her to take place, so they're encompassed within her. Their only intention must be to make their personality, individual soul, and greater soul. But this is there's 3 or really 5 levels of the soul, but you're trying to make every part of your soul into a vessel, and that means to make it a vessel, you have to clear whatever's inside already. Right? The way I've heard this expressed in other ways. If you want to just look at it in the mind level instead of feeling like you're hollowing out something else, is where someone came to a Rebbe and said, you speak about this, this peace of mind and this love all the time, but I don't feel any of it. I have no room in my head. My room is so full. There's no room for love. There's no room for peace. And then the Rebbe laughed and said, that's like saying that in a country as big as the Ukraine, there's no room for a few people to be. And he says, that's how big your mind and your heart is, but you just filled it with that much junk, that it fills that much of that space. And so when you remove,
Empty the vessel.
you gotta empty the vessel, and then you've got,
You're gonna
room.
open the vessel too. It can't just be filled with stuff, it has to be
Or
open.
break it, I mean, if
No,
you
no,
really
no,
wanna get
I wouldn't break
intense.
it, I would drill holes in it actually, but it's,
is that how you work the psychiatrist?
yeah, sure.
But,
I mean, listen, in the old days, what they used to do, is when you
Yes.
came to a psychiatrist would literally drill
drill
a hole
holes,
in
that's
your
what I'm
head.
saying,
You
yes,
you do a
take the
trepanation.
pressure out.
So, when I did my practice, I used to do the same thing, but through language.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
it was sort of in bad taste to drill holes in people's heads in those days.
Yes,
You know,
well, I mean, there's different strategies for getting to how you can get to this place, the so to speak annihilation. And I mean, maybe just because it does sound heavy, there's also an element of the annihilation isn't just, I mean, his text is talking about a very intense process, but underneath is great joy and great freedom and great, fullness and expansiveness. And we talk about it, but there's an Eastern practice of how do you do this? It's no more difficult than asking of every thought you have in your mind, how does this thought begin? But your thought begins with the I. And so, every thought, if you think about it, begins with I wanted blah, 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 blah. So if you retrace that thought and trace every thought and you get to the I, you get to the seed. And so but that in some ways feels like a gentler way of going through this process.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
But it's the same thing, yeah.
Because the eye you're looking for, your pure subject
Yeah,
is
or even
sort of
behind the eye.
ineffable to
Yeah.
yourself.
yeah,
It's ineffable to
Yeah.
yourself. You
yeah,
can't nail that down. So you can have that be anything you want it to be, or nothing at all, or something divine or whatever.
but it's the very core of your consciousness and of your being. And so that place is the place of pure consciousness, which is God, right? Because that pure consciousness is
It's pure consciousness, may not be.
well, it's the greater God. It's what's part of the universal. Anyway, it's part of the universal consciousness. Let's continue the analogy, but then they will continue to have the sun for a light by day and be bound to God. So what does it mean? You continue to have the sun for a light by day. You're still living your life in the world, right? You're still walking. It's not like you're suddenly just in a cave forever meditating. You're still living your life. I mean, they had to make food somehow in Eretz Yisrael, right? And they were farmers and doing their thing. And so he worked too. So you're still living your life, but there's a part of you that's bound to that place. Those divine attributes he was talking about in the other. Nonetheless, this is the part that is heavy, powerful, and challenging, and I think actually speaks to us well going into Pesach. Nonetheless, it is impossible to arrive at this state except by passing through a real death of the personality. And they shall be grasped by the real terror and suffering of a death throes, the personality, without any alteration or modification, because it is known that the Zohar called her the Shekhinah, the tree of death. I mean, so it's saying,
Well,
we're getting very intense, but
the personality can be thought of as the ego,
It is,
You know,
yeah,
it's
the
the
personality is the ego.
And in most sort of meditative practices,
Yeah.
one wants to remove the ego.
Mhm.
And the ego resists that.
The ego
of
resists
course.
that,
Resists that
exactly.
dramatically,
Yeah.
because the ego is embedded in us from a social perspective.
Or
And
even,
it-
or
it-
spiritually from an even deeper perspective, could
maybe,
be from lifetimes.
maybe,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to work on the ego. Once the ego goes, then you have sort of a more clear directive as
Yeah,
to
well,
what's
there's
that.
different levels of it too, for sure. But and the Buddhists talk about this too a lot, that there's different stages when the mind rebels, right? And the mind starts to say, wait a second, what are you doing here? You know, and I don't wanna be annihilated, right? And so, so I'd actually, until I read this text in preparation for this class, I'd never seen the Shekhinah called the tree of death, which is very interesting because it's also life. Go ahead. Yeah.
It comes to me that
Yeah.
the mass suicide in Metzada,
Yeah,
they were talking about the Buddhist interpretation.
really?
Are we allowed to commit suicide? It's in Joseph Ben Matityahu, when he hears about this is what we know.
He talks about the Buddhists?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll bring it, well,
Well, the physical, I don't know of any tradition that encourages the physical suicide, spiritual personality suicide maybe, but physical
about
suicide.
suicide, I need to
That's,
bring.
But I mean, I thought you were gonna go somewhere else with it, but I mean, as a Jewish people, we have this powerful idea that out of the ashes of the old comes in the new beginning, right? And I mean, the temple and then rabbinic Judaism, and it's out of the Shoah, right after the Shoah came the birth of the state of Israel and the whole new stage of the Jewish people. So it's deeply embedded in our history too, this idea, even though it's not something to look at as you want to create, obviously. And after they've gone through this process and have given their soul over to this dying and suffered the pains of death. So once you've actually given yourself over to it, then if God shines the light of divine mercy and revives them from on high, then the light shall illuminate their darkness and bind them to the eternal one and the divine. And so then you experience that rebirth. And so I'm not sure if it happened to the people that saw that, but I don't think so. But it's amazing that they were talking along those lines.
This
Yeah.
made sense to you too in your meditative practice of this thing?
I actually circled, like, this is exactly what I went through in 2 years. This is-
Okay, so
I think it's verbatim.
okay, so you felt these things without having any contact with Hassidim or anything at that point?
At that point, I think I had read close to 10,000 pages of Jewish theology.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, over a 2-year process, I read probably, around there.
Why-
I have an extensive
why-
library. I just moved to seclusion in the middle of nowhere and just read. I have a small company with a lot of employees, and I was going through things and I had to keep it together to feed 200 families. So I focused and didn't leave my house. Well, I removed all temptation from me and.
Where is but your company is in the western suburbs, not in
We're
Idaho?
virtual,
We're
no,
virtual.
100% virtual, no.
100% virtual, okay.
Yeah, my business partner and best friend lives in Idaho, so I moved out by him. We found a place in the middle of nowhere and just stayed there. I didn't see another person for, I think the longest I went was 125 days without seeing a person besides virtual. It was great.
Wow, that's a
Were you married at the time or not?
I was just getting divorced, but it was the reason for the divorce that I just, there was
you
a,
became one
it was
focus.
traumatic, there was very traumatic incident.
Wow,
I'll talk about just afterwards.
okay, well, yeah, thank you for sharing
No,
that.
thanks
That's
for this talk.
No.
that's what we're here. Well, gonna gotta go to my next thing, but in some ways, we have one more session. I'm not sure if we're gonna meet next time or not, in the middle of Pesach. We have 2 more weeks before I end. And I asked David if he would teach a class, take over a Thursday morning class while I'm away. And so you're gonna see a note from from the office with information about it. Thanks for doing that. And as we're really getting to the core of what the Hasidic path kind of became about, right? These ideas. And what I love about the stories that they illustrate how they were living this thing, not just teaching it or reading about it, but they were living it and it was manifesting in their lives, and that it wasn't coming just from intellectual discovery, but it was coming from a force that they passed on between them, which is, as we've talked about before, what gives religion life, and I think this is, as I've talked before, musical Shabbat, bringing in the Hasidic nigunim and other things, is trying to bring a little taste of this life to Judaism, because that's what makes it not something empty, but something that's interesting. We don't always have to completely destroy one's own personality to taste some of it, but the more you bring it, the more religion is alive, and the traditions, I think, are powerful and something you really can pass on from generation to generation with a little oomph to them, and what catches. So a few more weeks left, and Chag Sameach, and happy Pesach.
The group, the whole group here, then the Zoom group, know that you're gonna be gone 4 months.
So yeah, I'll be gone. I'll be gone for 4 months. I'm going on a sabbatical. I announced it at the annual meeting back in January, and I'll be sending an email about it, or our president will. And have if you look at my May bulletin, I talk about my sabbatical. I'll be going for 4 months, and there'll be people giving divrei Torah, and there'll be people doing classes, and I have 2 scholar in residences who are coming, and.
So when are you going to be back? The high holiday?
I'll be back end of high holiday. The reason this year is the reason I'm doing it is because the high holidays are so late. So high holidays don't begin till October. Rosh Hashanah is in October. So I'll be back for Labor Day. And our plan initially was to go to Israel, but I think it's not the right time. So yeah.
Very good.
Can I ask a real quick question before we
Sure, go ahead.
So I apologize for my ignorance here, but I have a concept of the Shekinah, but I don't know that it's very good or very accurate. So I mean,
Yeah.
I've always thought of it as like the presence of God, it was in the temple, or at least that's what I think it was originally.
So it's a great question, and it's something that you wouldn't be alone in that. But initially the Shekinah was just a name for the presence of God. Comes from the verb to dwell, right? And this idea that's in the Torah, that God's presence physically on some level dwelt, that there was a tangible presence that dwelt in the tabernacle and then in the temple. And then we have this idea that radiated throughout the land and it protected people. And this is pretty mainstream Judaism. It's what allowed prophecy to happen within ancient Israel. It's what, but then the Shekinah for the Kabbalists, later, the Kabbalists believe that they were transmitting ancient secrets that the prophets had, but then the Shekinah later become the feminine presence of God, and kind of a part of, became associated with almost like a part of God that's like a divine mother, or the Shabbat bride. That was all the Shekinah. But and then it also became associated with the lowest of the Sifirot. So in some ways, it's a boundary between spiritual reality and physical reality, because that's what it is. It's a very tangible spiritual force. It's the most tangible, not the most spiritual and hard to refine, hard to grasp, but that it's kind of like a protective presence that can rest on an individual or in groups of individuals, and it supercharges their spiritual life and their way of being. So it's complicated. Even some people talk about it's the force inside the atom, but it's also the force of life. It's what makes plants sprout and gives all of life. It's like the life force itself. So it's the life force, which is the feminine part of God. It's the dynamic force that protects and that makes religious life vital and alive.
Never heard it referred to as the tree of death.
The tree of death is different, but if it's life, then it has to be death too, because it's the two sides. I'll say this and then I have to leave, but when I teach Judaism to Hindu people, I often say we're the opposites, right? In Hinduism, they have this belief of like 300 million gods, and that's what they tell, all the people. But then when you get to the most elevated forms of Hindu theology, they say, no, all of that is just illusion. There's really just one being. And I say, Judaism, it's kind of the opposite. We say there's one being, there's only oneness. But then when you get into the most kind of elevated theologies, they say, of course, there's oneness, but within that oneness, there's different expressions. And then you get to Kabbalah, but it used to be. So,
Yeah.
more next time. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.